Hello, thank you for joining our presentation about the student's experience of emergency remote teaching. My name is Trevor Raichura, and I work at Ritsumeikan University in Osaka. By the time COVID-19 became a pandemic, the academic school year for 2019 was already finished. The 2020 school year had not yet begun, but teachers needed to make adjustments to their materials in order to make the 2020 school year go smoothly. First of all, since they would be working from home, they needed to secure office space. Secondly, they needed to find a way to make sure that their materials still reached curriculum objectives despite the new style of presenting it to students. And thirdly, they needed to become more familiar with online tools. So that took a little bit of effort to do in a hurry. However, for students, the adjustments were even greater, in my opinion. And in our case, students were spread across Japan and even across Southeast Asia, particularly the students who had not yet matriculated. Some of them did not own computers, nor did they have adequate training in how to use a computer properly. For some of them, their internet connection was unstable. They would also have to learn new content in a foreign language from unfamiliar teachers who were using materials that had not yet been tested or had a track record of success. To compound things, some of them had to deal with financial problems, social issues such as not being able to make friends, and health concerns over the new pandemic. This created a very anxious environment for our students. That having been said, we decided that we wanted to find out how our students were doing. So Robert Andrews is going to explain the background information of our situation. Bjorn Fusting will go through the methodology of our research. Louis Lafleur did the data crunching, and he will give you some of the important figures from our research. Will Fusco conducted some interviews and will give you some of the students' voices based on their experiences with ERT. And finally, I will be back for the findings, limitations, and follow-ups of this project. And now I hand the screen and the mic over to my colleague, Robert Andrews.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. This is some background information to the study. I will give a brief account of the university response to COVID-19, followed by some relevant differences between emergency remote teaching, or ERT, versus traditional online teaching, and then I will cover the purpose of the study. The university initially responded to COVID-19 with a proposed 4-week online period beginning on the 6th of April and ending on the 2nd of May. The idea being that students would go back to the classroom for face-to-face lessons following Golden Week. However, there were two developments, and one which is that the university learning management system, Manaba, was overwhelmed by teachers and students all using it at the same time, and the Japanese government announcing a state of emergency on April the 7th. As a result, classes were suspended from the 8th of April until the 6th of May. The campus was closed to students, administrative staff, and teachers were asked to work from home. On the 21st of April, the university announced that classes would resume on the 7th of May and that the spring semester would be reduced from 15 weeks down to 11 or 12 weeks, depending upon the day of the lesson. Also, the university proposed two methods of teaching, either on demand using Manaba or live stream using Skype for Business or Zoom. The teachers in our department sent a survey to students to find out what access they had to equipment such as PCs, laptops, printers, etc., and decided to make the majority of the compulsory subjects on demand. The exception was the speaking course, which it was felt that live stream would be better suited for them. So each of the teachers were given a compulsory subject to create material for, and this was shared on the Google Drive between the full-time teachers who designed it, as well as the part-time teachers as well. Some discretion was given to teachers if they preferred to have some optional live stream classes, or if they wanted to use any other platforms for teaching. So this brings us to the difference between traditional online teaching versus ERT. With traditional online teaching, teachers often have experience with online teaching. The methods have been tried and tested, materials are designed for online teaching, and the platforms have been carefully selected for this purpose. In addition, traditional online teaching is chosen by the students as the method of study, whereas with emergency remote teaching, teachers are not experienced in this form of teaching. Materials are often designed for classroom teaching rather than online teaching. The platforms have to sometimes be rather hastily chosen, and the students did not choose online learning. So the expectations or equipment might not match their learning experience. So the purpose of this study was to gauge student satisfaction with ERT that we provided. Specifically, we wanted to find out the ease of access of each of the tools that we decided to use, the interest in them, and the perceived usefulness of the tools. Those were Manaba, which is the LMS of the university, instructor pre-recorded videos, Google Forms, which we used for quizzes, Flipgrid, which is a video hosting site, Zoom or Skype for Business, which we use for live stream lessons, and Quizlet or Egg or Memo, which we use for vocabulary learning. So now I'm going to turn you over to Bjorn for the methodology.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. My name is Bjorn Fusting, and I'm going to talk about the methodology of our study. So as Rob was saying, we wanted to find out about the overall student satisfaction of the ERT in English classes, as well as finding out about the specific tools that were used for those classes and how easy they were to access, the interest and the usefulness of each of them. To do so, we set up a study and we had a questionnaire and a follow-up interviews. For the questionnaire, it was done via Google Forms and it was administered in 82 classes, and approximately 1,600 students were enrolled in those classes, and out of those, 1,153 students took part. A couple of students were enrolled in multiple classes, either two electives or elective and a normal class, and therefore we had slightly more answers than we had participants. We then set up follow-up interviews, and we had invited 30 students who had agreed to take part in those interviews, but unfortunately only two students ended up taking part, and I'll explain a little bit later on why I think that was the case. Each interview was about 25 to 30 minutes long. So first, about the questionnaire. The questionnaire was bilingual. It was administered via Google Forms, and the students first had to answer, does your teacher use a specific tool, let's say Google Forms? If they said yes, they would then ask follow-up questions. How easy was it to access the Google Forms? How useful did you find the Google Forms? And how interesting did you find them? And this was rated on a 5-point scale. There was also an open-ended question. They could have any comments or suggestions for each of the tools. Once they'd answered those, then they were asked about their overall satisfaction of the English classes for the whole semester. And that was rated on a 10-point scale. There was also an open-ended question there where they could make any comments or suggestions about overall program. The questionnaire was sent out in week 6 to 9, depending a little bit on the teacher and the class. And this was in a semester that was overall 11 or 12 weeks. For the follow-up interviews, we invited 30 students, 10 from each level. So 10 students who had said they were very highly satisfied, mid-level and low-level overall satisfaction. They had agreed to take part in the follow-up questions. However, since this was done at the end of the semester, only 2 participants ended up taking part in the study. We believe because we sent it to the official university accounts, they might not have seen the invitation or been too busy. The interviews were conducted via video conference and took about 20 to 30 minutes each. They were done by 2 separate interviewers following a semi-structured interview plan, and then later on transcribed. So over now to Louis, who's going to talk about the results.
Thank you, Bjorn. Yes, my name is Louis Lafleur, and I'm from Leeds-Macon University as well. I'll be presenting on quantitative survey data. So to what extent were the 6 online tools used? Let's have a look. Okay, first, pre-recorded videos. No came back at 49.6%, sometimes at 12.9%, most of the time at 7.2%, and yes came back at 30.3%. Google Forms, no came back at 22.4%, sometimes at 9.7%, and yes at 67.9%. Flipgrid, so mostly used for the speaking classes, no came back at 63.8%, sometimes at 10.8%, and yes at 25.3%. Vocabulary learning software, so mostly Quizlet and my own software called egomemo.com was used. No came back at 68.8%, and yes came back at 31.2%. Manaba+R, which is the LMS, Learning Management System at Leeds-McCann University, no came back at 4.1%, and yes came back at 95.9%. Again, some teachers may have opted to use Google Classrooms, Edmodo, or even just email. Okay, live streaming tools, so Zoom and Skype. No came back at 79%. Yes, Zoom came back at 10.1. Sometimes Zoom came back at 10.5. 3 responses for sometimes Skype and 1 response for yes Skype. Okay, so of the 6 online tools I've just presented, which do you think yielded the highest satisfaction among the participants? Okay, here are the results. So on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, 1 being highly satisfied and 5 being not satisfied, so somewhat inverted. So the lower the score, the better. Manaba+R came in first, pre-recorded video second, Zoom Skype third, Google Forms fourth, Flipgrid fifth, and vocabulary software sixth. In terms of usability, the overall stats and usability are on the same rank, or ease of use, we could say. Also, in terms of interest, similar, but some discrepancies. Actually, pre-recorded videos came in first, and a flip between Flipgrid and vocabulary software. One thing that's interesting to note is pre-recorded videos always seem to come up on top in comparison to Zoom and Skype. I guess as presenters and teachers, we are better when we pre-record ourselves. And finally, usefulness. A flip between Flipgrid and vocabulary software. Here are the overall means and standard deviations. And Cronbach Alpha came back at 0.906, which shows that this is very reliable data. Thank you. Next, overall stats, so class style. On demand came back at 83.4%. Live stream came back at 5.2%. And a mixture of both came back at 11.5%. Which do you think yielded the highest satisfaction among the participants? And the answer is, so here on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being excellent, so the higher the mean, the better. Likert scale again. On demand came last with 5.59. Live came in second with 5.84. And a mix of both came in first at 6.13. From left to right, a correlation, a Pearson-R correlation of 0.08. So low correlation, positive, and a p-value of 0.005. I repeat, 0.005, 2 zeros before the 5. So very significant data indeed. Finally, collegiate year. So differences between first year, second year, third, and fourth year students. Who were the most satisfied? And the results are, have a guess? Fourth years, yes. First years came in last, fourth. So again, on a Likert scale of 10, first years only had 5.51, fourth years had 7.57. So a low correlation when you align the data from left to right, Pearson-R of 0.09, and a p-value of 0.001. There's an extra 0 there, very significant data. Okay, that's all for my part. Thank you for listening. I'll be handing over the presentation to my colleague, Will Fosco, who will be presenting on qualitative survey data.
I'm William Fusco from Raichura University, and this is the qualitative section. We're looking at interview and short answer responses. Please keep in mind that at this time, this compilation is not exhaustive, but it's just meant to give us a kind of insight into potential reasons why students answered as they did. So I'll go through the 6 categories from the highest ranked to the lowest. Let's start with Manaba+R LMS. So here are some comments that the students had. Every week's tasks are posted on course news, so it's very convenient to do the work. The written instruction in Manaba+R is easier to understand and use than video. When we submit an assignment, I would like to submit it on Manaba because it's much easier. So basically, many students answered that they liked the ease of use of the LMS. Pre-recorded videos. Here are some comments from the students. I can know what I have to do easily. Videos give me the information of who our teacher is, so I'm glad my teacher posts them. It's good to see the teacher's face, and I'm satisfied with the videos. If it's possible to explain about the content, teach us the content of the textbook, that would be better. Here are some student comments from lesson tools. Sometimes I can't enter Zoom, but I don't know the reasons. There are quite a few times when it's difficult to connect and you can't hear your voice. It's a little bit awkward at first. After we have a small group project or something like that, we can actually contact our line contacts and sort of get along well. And I felt more comfortable to talk in the Zoom class. Here are some comments from Google Forms. So we don't need to take notes and only need to click. So it's very useful and we don't need a lot of time to answer it. I sometimes feel it's hard, but I think it helps me study English. It is not easy to make sure of the input contents just before submission. If I go to the previous page, all the data will be lost. Now here are some Flipgrid comments. We should provide our face for many people to see. I don't like it, but it is very helpful for studying. Uploading videos takes a lot of time. Before, I posted my video incorrectly, but I can't delete that. After I consulted with Flipgrid on Instagram, they said you need to contact your teacher. Now here are some comments about vocabulary software. I'm not sure if I actually completed the task on Quizlet since it doesn't say anything. I had completed the assignment, but my status was started but not completed. I can't log in. It is good because it's like a game. Finally, here are some general comments that students had about the semester. I just want to go to school as soon as possible. Every teacher uses different forms of submissions, so sometimes I get confused on what to do. So I wish every professor used the same platforms. I don't think the quality of the class went bad or anything like that. I just felt as though the format is completely different, and sometimes I felt as though I was doing more work than a usual semester's classes. Okay, and now Trevor is going to wrap things up.
Thank you, Will. Let's conclude this presentation with a look at some of the major findings, the limitations of the research, as well as future research ideas. First of all, it seems to me that the majority of our students preferred the usage of Manaba+R, our LMS, in part because they already had either experience or training in its usage, but also they could use a Japanese interface, which made for more easy comprehension. The pre-recorded videos were helpful for students because they could watch them over and over until they understood the content to their satisfaction. This obviously could not happen in a face-to-face teaching environment. Although most of our students did not experience a mix between on-demand and live streaming, many of them said they preferred this option. And I think it is because it allowed them flexibility in their own schedule making, plus an opportunity for social interaction. Fourth-year students, however, seemed the most satisfied with the way things were done in the spring semester. And I think maybe that's because they had already established social contact with their fellow students, and they had other priorities going into their fourth year. As for limitations, as Bjorn previously mentioned, we didn't really get very much qualitative data, and that is because of the timing of the interviews. It would have been nice to get first and second year students' feedback as well in more detail. Also, because of the nature of our situation, it would be really hard to replicate this study in other timing. There may not be another state of emergency. There may not be an emergency remote teaching situation in our lives anymore. However, because we are doing online teaching this fall as well, we've been able to implement some of the suggestions that our students gave us through this survey. On that note, we could definitely do another survey this fall to see how students are experiencing ERT or online learning this semester. Circumstances have changed, which means that perhaps their opinions have changed as well. There is no state of emergency. They're more familiar with the content, and they're also more familiar with the online tools that are being offered to them. Furthermore, they may have less anxiety over the spread of COVID-19 at this point. Longitudinal study would add validity to the findings that we have. In conclusion, ERT has stretched us all as teachers. And even though we made it safely through the first semester, we need to also make sure that we are giving our students voice and making sure that their level of satisfaction and comfort over the usability of our materials is satisfactory. I think everybody deserves a high five or an air high five, an elbow bump, a pat on the back, so to speak. Thank you so much for your attention through this presentation and for your hard work in the spring semester.